to Solving for the Undefined podcast. I'm your host, Johanna, founder of Miss Kuiper's Classroom, the place that equips teachers in creating a healthy math classroom where students can thrive, no matter their academic abilities. But it's not always about the numbers, and that's why I'm here, bringing you the formulas to solve your problems, math and otherwise, plus strategies on cultivating that necessary math mindset. And that's what you can count on. Hello. Welcome to a brand new episode. Today's episode is the start of a 5-part series on how to better engage all of your students, no matter their academic abilities. When I first started teaching in the classroom, I had this wild idea that I could just start teaching a concept and students would magically get it. Follow the curriculum to a T. Yeah, that definitely was not the case for the majority of my students. I remember this one Pythagorean theorem lesson in particular I did my student teaching year. It was a major flop. I soon realized that teaching at this school required me to scaffold in every lesson to make it accessible for students to learn. A high percentage of the students I worked with then and the students I work with now test below grade level. And not just one grade level, but 3 or more levels behind. I quickly learned that I needed to shift my teaching to match how my students needed to learn. And scaffolding is one of the main ways I accomplish this. Actually, this is what kind of sparked the creation of my business, Miss Kuiper's Classroom. I remember a very specific day when I was searching the internet for a resource that would help me teach Pythagorean theorem. And every worksheet I came across had so many variable things within it that wasn't exactly what my students needed in order to begin to understand the Pythagorean theorem. It just wasn't there. And with that, I was like, all right, I guess I'm going to have to do this myself. And from then on, I became passionate about reaching my students below grade level and making the on-grade level material accessible to them. And if I've said anything so far that resonates with you or sounds like you, I'm glad you're here. I know how overwhelming it can be to feel like you have no idea what to do, or the stress of having to come up with all of your own material and lessons. My hope is that you gain one thing from this episode today that you can easily apply to your classroom this week. So in today's episode, we're going to be talking about how scaffolding can help you engage with your students. But before we get to the academic definition, first let's talk about what scaffolding is in the construction world. Scaffolding is the temporary structures to assist workers during construction of a building. So any temporary elevated work surface used to support workers and or their materials is considered scaffolding. Now, taking that into the education world, scaffolding is defined by breaking up the learning into chunks and providing a tool or structure with each chunk. Now, merging these two ideas together, let's think of the building as the learning. We want students to build learning and build understanding of different concepts. And we as teachers can help students by giving them these temporary elevated structures to better access the learning. Now let's take a moment to zoom out. Did you see what I did there? I took the idea of scaffolding, connected it to a non-math or put it in a quote-unquote real-world context. Then I explained how it related to our math situation. That in and of itself is scaffolding. That's how we make math meaningful and how students can have comprehensive understanding in the long run. Now zooming back in. The key to scaffolding is it's meant to be temporary, not permanent. Eventually, as the internal structure of the building or learning is finished, the scaffolding will no longer be needed for students to access the learning or the concept. The learning might not be done yet, but the scaffolding isn't needed for students to complete the understanding. It's already there, and they can work on the inside without having to need that scaffolding. But Johanna, why is scaffolding necessary? Can't I just teach my students the algorithms, math hacks, and those processes instead? Yeah, you could. But what's your reason for doing that? It might make your teaching life easier. It might seem like your students understand faster, but you aren't making the math meaningful, and that is how your students are going to learn. Not only does it need to be accessible, it needs to have meaning and make sense why they are doing it. The goal of scaffolding is to move students progressively towards stronger and comprehensive understanding to ultimately gain independence in the learning process. As an 8th grade math teacher, my job is to prepare my students for high school math. Therefore, not only do I need to help fill in as many gaps as I can from what they need prior to 8th grade, but I need to help them continue to build on grade level knowledge as well. And that's a big task and definitely a scary one. So if you are feeling overwhelmed like I was many years ago, we're going to take a deep breath. We're going to inhale and exhale for 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I want to tell you something. I teach at a Title I school. This means that the majority of my students that I teach come from families who live in poverty. And psychologically, this changes how those students perform academically, socially, and behaviorally in my classroom. Now, there's one of my favorite books by Eric Jensen called Engaging Students with Poverty in Mind. We read this as like a school study a few years ago, and every time I read it, I get this super empowered, I can't breathe well feeling. So I'm going to read to you what Eric Jensen says are his next steps. If you have this book, this is from page 175. Your next step. Every student in your school would rather be engaged by an energetic, caring teacher than be bored by someone who is going through the motions. Kids deserve a great day every day. They need role models. They need caring adults. They need savvy risk takers who aren't afraid to fail. If you're not modeling those qualities, where will your students learn them? If you're thinking this sounds impossible, maybe a little practice would expand your conception of what is possible. A conversation between Alice and the White Queen in Alice's Adventures in Wonderland comes to mind. Alice laughed. "There's no use trying," she said. "One can't believe impossible things." "I dare say you haven't had much practice," said the Queen. "When I was your age, I always did it for a half an hour a day. Why, sometimes I've believed as many as 6 impossible things before breakfast." For impossible things to happen, you have to envision them first. It's up to you. Miracles will happen in your classroom when you build your dreams bigger than your challenges. They deserve nothing less than your best effort. Can you be that miracle teacher for your class this year? Will you try? Your students await your answer. Every time. That is why scaffolding is necessary. That is why engaging your students is a necessity within your classroom. Our students deserve to have a math teacher who will break down a concept into chunks and structure each section so they can learn it. No matter how much you teach something, if you do not make it meaningful, if you do not make it accessible, if you do not make it understandable to the students you have, what's the point? I know today's episode was short, but hopefully sweet. I'm excited because next week we're going to be talking about 5 ideas to engage your students in the classroom. So, for today, what's next? I have some exciting news. You can join my brand new Facebook group for middle school math teachers. Get ready for the name. I love it. It's so much fun. A fraction of math teachers. It's a place for those who have students working below grade level, yet don't have the curriculum to support those students. You'll receive support, free tools to increase engagement, and a community of teachers who are in the same boat. So I would like to invite you, a teacher friend, into this community of math teachers. To join, all you have to do is go to misskuypersclassroom.com/group or click the link in the description of this podcast episode and join on in. I hope to see you in the community, and thank you so much for listening to today's episode. And as always, a calculator. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode. To find all the links and resources to things talked about in this episode, head on over to MissKuipersClassroom.com and click on podcast.